a good man shouldn't be like, the baseline shouldn't be, I've been pretty good. The baseline should be a man that serves his community and has fulfilling relationships and does his own personal work. And it's about creating eldership and creating a better world for his grandkids. That's fuck. If we had men like that en masse, that would be extraordinary.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and I'm pretty pumped today. But let's face it, I'm bloody always pumped because I have great people on the show. Today I have a wonderful guest, a man by the name of Hunter Johnson. And Hunter is someone that I, have come to know. One of those weird kind of situations where he went to a school in Sydney called Knox Grammar. I moved to Sydney and started playing for Knox Old Boys rugby. And as soon as I started there, and I eventually ended up meeting a lot of men who happened to be Hunter's friends, didn't know this. I'm in men's work. You're going to meet this dude, Hunter. We have email exchanges, conversations, and we don't ever eventually meet. Dude lives in Melbourne. Until the end of 2019, when he came and spoke at an event of mine, which was super powerful, and he just does some amazing work. And I was very excited to have him on the show and learn about his journey into what he does. And so I'm going to read through his bio so then we can kind of explore it. Hunter is the founder and CEO of two purpose-driven organizations. He leads the Mancave, which is an emotional intelligence charity that has impacted the lives of 20,000 young men across Australia. I'm going to insert my own piece into his bio. They have worked with 20,000 young men in schools and workshops, but they've potentially impacted many, many more lives. Let's be clear on that, right? When you do specific work with men, young men and their emotional intelligence, you potentially impact a lot of other people. Hunter also leads Stuff, which is an investor-backed, purpose-driven personal care brand for the next generation of men. And we'll talk about this, jutting my own words into his bio again. We'll talk about this later on in the podcast. One of the purpose-driven personal care brands, Stuff, one of the purposes is actually to create income for Mancave, so Mancave can go out into the community and go out to schools and support men, young men, in understanding themselves, understanding their emotional experience, and understanding like what is masculinity and how they can find their fit. Okay, back to his bio. Alongside his work in the masculinity space, Hunter is an advisor to the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, a charity championing young people throughout the Commonwealth, alongside Prince Harry, the President of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. Hunter's work has led him to speak around the world, including presenting at the United Nations, Government House, that's Australia, Human Rights Commissions, Sydney Opera House, Melbourne Town Hall, graduation ceremonies, and various universities. Hunter has been recognised as a finalist for the 2020 Young Australian of the Year Awards, listed as one of Harper Bazaar's Visionary Men of 2019, named a 2018 Queen's Young Leader by Her Majesty the Queen, yeah, that's it, and 2018 winner of EY Social Entrepreneur of the Year. Man, and you get that when you speak to Hunter, and we will explore his legit meeting the Queen and being awarded a medal by her, and then his work with Prince Harry and Meghan. Pretty crazy stuff. But I was really, really excited to talk to Hunter about his work with young men because, by and large, the kind of guests I've had on the show and the kind of conversations we have are speaking to men, and men who are potentially working with men or have some kind of impact on men, or some take for men generally, maybe you're listening, you're in the age bracket of kind of 30 to 45 or so. But of course, we were all young men. We were all adolescents. We were all in the age bracket of 12 to 16 at some point. And that is such a phenomenal area to be working in, influencing those men and those young men, and how they can then influence their own life, their own trajectory, and also the people around them. And of course, we are all still someone who has that adolescent in us. And as you'll hear us talk in the podcast, potentially he's still pulling a lot of the strings. Maybe in ineffective ways. Has you chasing your dick around the world, or an idea of what it is to be a man, or an idea of what success is that isn't necessarily working for you or connecting for you. And so you'll see Hunter and I talk about that work and the work that they do, of course, and how that has relevance for us men who have passed that age, which brings me to something that I would be remiss not to mention, and that is, my major work, the Everyday Legends Academy, is a work for men who want to really understand who they are and what they're about. How have you come to be who you are? Why do you have the beliefs? Why do you have the behaviors? Why do you have the results? Why do you have the life that you have? And then, what do you want for yourself? Who do you want to be? And why? Really connecting to what is meaningful to you. And then pragmatically getting about, how do we make that happen? That is fundamentally the work in Everyday Legends Academy. And we have an intake open for enrollment inquiries now. Of course, depending on where you hear this, but if you hear this hot off the press, then I strongly suggest that you get either in touch with me on email, or hit the link that's sit in the show notes and get yourself on the phone with me, Mike. That's me. You know what I'm like. It's like talking to a mate, and I will be lovingly honest with you, and we will figure out if ELA is the full and remarkable solution for you and your life and your future, as it has been for so many men before you. All right, that's my plug for this week. Now, let's get into the show. Hunter Johnson, welcome to the Everyday Legends show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Pumped to hang out with you for the next little while.
Absolutely. And, it's one of those things, right? I think we came to actually know about and of each other via, your old school Knox, and where I ended up playing a little bit of rugby, for those listening on the other side of the world. And there was a lot of those, you guys need to meet, and it never happened for quite some time. And then we're very fortunate when you came and spoke at an event of mine in Sydney a couple of years ago now. So, Hunter, I know a bit about you, and plenty of people do. You've had some great press and all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure we'll explore that. But I would love to get to know a little bit more about you, certainly for my audience who are sitting here now going, cool, who's this dude? So where I want to start is this, and you can take this, mate, wherever you want. Who is Hunter Johnson?
Let me slow down and feel that. I think, the answer that's right there for me right now is just someone trying to work out who I am. Everything from who I've inherited, from my family, from what were the conditionings of me as a child, a little boy, as a teenage boy, to, I just turned 30, and just understanding who am I outside of all the noise. And I'm kind of in a pocket of life where I'm in the mess of it right now. It's a pretty well-timed question. And I think someone who's just, what I'm learning is someone I just keep choosing to lean in. And, that's, I'm just proud of myself for doing that. So,
Very nice. And that is something I witness. And I also resonate with the, various stages. It's not necessarily the age, but that period, perhaps around 30. Okay, so then take me into this, leaning in. So what do you find yourself leaning into?
Right now, I'm really leaning into the world that my inner teenage boy created for me, which is effectively around the social hierarchy of high school, and then a lot of how I've built my life has been from the lens of a teenage boy. Thinking of status, of social credit,
Mm-hmm.
to what is success, to doing it alone, to I can't trust anyone, to am I going to be, the only one on this path forever? And at a point where, the language which, I'll say is some people might get is kind of working out, am I unplugging myself from the matrix? And if so, what does that look like? And how do I just keep coming back to trust and to love? And being really responsible inside of that, knowing that, there's people in my life that I've built businesses with, I've built relationships with, who know me. And just being slow and accountable in how I move through this kind of wild little murky period.
Yes, murky periods, beautiful. So, okay, build business. We're talking about, I'm starting to realize that where I am right now, funnily enough, is the result of the actions that I've chosen and what has impacted those actions, right? Certainly as I was a teenage boy and living in a bunch of experiences. So I know that you work in some part of what you do with teenage boys. So I kind of want to explore that, but I'm interested to go into this. So when you take yourself back to, let's just go, 16-year-old Hunter, what is his experience?
I was a very wild 16-year-old.
Yes.
Loved the thrill of getting in trouble, of having the best banter with my mates, of going out on the weekend and just creating stories, and kind of felt like I was living a double life a bit too. Had some dynamics going on at home that I was just trying to manage, but didn't know how. Didn't know that you talked about it. Like just not an option. And was built my entire identity around being the alpha male of my already very alpha group of mates. Rugby was my world. I wanted to be a professional rugby player, and at 16 I'd just broken my leg, which I think we've talked about before.
Yes.
But it was compartment syndrome. So the guy's knee went in my shin, metal rod, 4 screws, 2 skin grafts, 2 blood transfusions, ended up being about 6 operations in total. And it was the first time in my life that I felt the terror of vulnerability. And I got left with a comment from my grandpa, who said to me, if you were that good at sport, imagine if you could push that energy into something a little more meaningful. It's pretty...
At 16, you got that?
At 16, sitting on the couch, still vividly remember it, was playing FIFA and 6 months at home. And he was a man of character, like a real character. And, even now I get emotional thinking about the impact of my life. And, I look at that as that situation as like the worst and best thing that's happened to me. And also I'm at a point now where I don't want to be defined by that. It was a chapter that the chapter gave me some momentum, and now I'm like, nah, I'm ready for the next bit.
Yeah. Can I, be okay with where I'm at because of that, but let go of it and move beyond it? Very nice. Yes. Yeah. We have, for those who, have listened to plenty of my stuff, they'll go, doesn't Mike have a very similar story to that? Yes. I was 18, didn't have the 2 blood transfusions and 6 operations, just the 1. But yes, very interesting. And I also remember a time on the couch playing Crash Bandicoot on PlayStation after I had my broken leg. And I was essentially had my grandmother at home. So it was a short period of her life when she did that. And, it's interesting because one of the conversations I'm like massively interested in and see the just huge importance of is the role and the importance of elders. It sounds like, your grandfather had that role a little bit for me, whereas I didn't see at the time. And, with, I think, pretty honest, grounded reflection now, didn't really see my grandmother in that role. But, it's very interesting to hear that impact that it had on you, right? Just a simple, seemingly easy little thing to say, which actually comes via his vast experience to be able to deliver that line when it was needed to the dude who was, potentially open to it, right?
Absolutely. And I think to your point on elders, for me, my experience with elders, they have the ability to deliver a really succinct truth. just pierces, and literally can't run from it, particularly with broken legs. It's interesting on I think it's all about the eldership piece as well. And, there's two tenets that come up for me. One is from Michael Mead, and he talks about us having a society of olders, but not elders.
Yeah.
And how there's this seduction to youth. And what we actually need is the intergenerational leadership, the capability, the experience of elders mixed in with the innovation and audacity of our young. And the second is a quote that Anna Rubinstein introduced to me, which was, the role of the elder is to create the glorious mistakes for the young. So to create space for the glorious mistakes of the young. And I fucking love that. So nice.
So can you take us in? I'm interested. Let's go into that. When did you hear that from Anna, by the way? What can you say roughly? You're 30 now.
Yeah, I would have heard that from him probably about 5 years ago, I would say.
Cool. So, you're 25, right? Which for some people is old, but, in the big scheme of things, you're still pretty fresh. So how did that land on 25-year-old Hunter? What did that then, kind of like anchor into? What did you make that mean?
It struck a deep chord. It's one of those quotes that I could just remember straight off the back, which I think for me reflects that it had a pretty deep resonance, and it just reflects wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. And my experience of people who I feel, and it's pretty rare, but I feel have elder status, which for me is like a state of consciousness, not a status in society. There's a patience and there's a humor, and it's like and there's just a subtle nudge, and it's like everything's going to be, it's like a big warm blanket that can also be piercingly sharp at the same time. So yeah, I've just been drawn to that. And I think, as we look at where we spend our time, particularly as men, it's often in the corporate world, and it's hard to develop consciousness in the corporate world. The model of success is around status and accumulation of power. And, the ultimate is, again, this is that kind of boy versus man psychology. Actually, again, from Anna on this one, is boy psychology is I am center of the universe, and man psychology is I am a part of the universe. And we only need to look who's running our respective companies to see what psychology they're stuck in.
Yeah. And, as you're saying that, right, I'm also like extrapolating out across industry because, I think the corporate and political is a pretty obvious point of that, but then you go out into trades and you go out to anything that is not necessarily male dominant, but it's a pretty easy one to notify. I think we see that quite often, right? So let's go into that. One of your businesses is called Mancave, so I'd love for you to kind of explain what that is and what you do, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, awesome. So Mancave is a charity. We started it in about 2014 and started off as a passion project. Now it's a whole beast of its own right. And effectively, what we do is send in super diverse, very relatable male facilitators into high schools who just create the space for teenage boys to take off the mask and start to open up about their life, their experiences, develop language, have the permission to lean into those conversations, and just to normalize it, to make it cool and okay and actually courageous. And really what we do is facilitation, not presenting. So we don't come in with a PowerPoint slide to fix masculinity. We do a lot of work with our facilitators to understand group dynamics, the human condition, everything from archetypes to positive psychology, to the future of education, to clowning, to storytelling, to mythology, and effectively so that they have range, so that they can walk in and develop trust and have banter and play, and then take boys on a journey to authenticity. And we've now worked with just over 20,000 boys. We run full day, deep experiential programs, ideally with multiple touch points, and now working with their parents and their teachers. The biggest challenge we have now is we're service delivery, and it's scaling service delivery. So maintain quality whilst you increase the quantity.
Yeah. A nice problem, and certainly a nice one to hear, from myself. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. So, one of the things, and I think you may have said it, but I want to go into it because I think it's really important, is, okay, so why do you guys do this?
Yeah, so on a personal level, a lot of really important men in my life I saw struggle with mental illness and do nothing about it. And that ended up in some of the worst situations like suicide. There was just a lot of pain around. And on the other side of that, some of the most important women in my life I saw be on the end of that too. An experience, whether it was physical or sexual harassment or abuse. And it just didn't make sense to me that the systems we have to deal with both mental health and family violence are geared around crisis management. And we deal with a symptom opposed to the root cause. And if we look at the root cause, it's often the outdated script that our young men have inherited around masculinity. And so and then the stats kind of back it all up. We know that 1 in 4 young men will experience a mental illness before they're 18. Suicide's the biggest killer of young men. And then more than 1 woman a week is killed by male perpetrated family violence, which is, our brothers, sisters, and so that's it really. And I think what we're doing that's cutting through is we just take a strengths-based approach working with young men. It's a pretty bloody confusing time to be a man for us, when we're a teenager with everything that's going on, the consensus debate. Grace Tame as Australian of the Year, a survivor of multiple experiences of child abuse, to Christian Porter, our highest office of law, having rape allegations. And then, complicated language like toxic masculinity. It's like, hashtag all men, rape culture. It's like, fuck, it is a complicated game right now. And we just want to give boys effectively the self-awareness that they can choose how they show up in any moment.
Yeah, nice. Creating a new paradigm potentially, but on some level, creating new options, increasing the bandwidth of like, how can I show up and how can I be as a person, and then obviously, and a big part of that, as a man.
That's right. And there's this whole equality movement is so layered and so complex, and it's systemic. And for us, we can't be everything to everyone, but what we can do is be at that kind of, we work with boys 12 to 16 years. So when they're really kind of forming their identity, their brain's developing, their social skills are developing, and really trying to be that positive influence that is a role model that shows them a way of being that they weren't exposed to previously. And from that, it's really just giving them the keys to create their own version of masculinity.
Nice. And so you said, now there's follow-up stuff as well as with the parents and the teachers and so on. This is maybe more just me in my own interest. How's that part going? Getting the buy-in, because obviously there has to be buy-in from a school to bring you in, but then there's the parents, you're working with kids, right? So how's that process going? Because that fundamentally has to be a huge part of the longer term plan, right?
Yeah, big time. And we've been on a journey with it for the last kind of 4 or 5 years, where we would drive out to regional communities, book a town hall, run a night that upskills parents, and there'd be huge demand, and then you'd get like 8 people turn up.
Yeah.
And it's like, fuck, okay, so that's we have. There's demand there, but parents and both teachers are incredibly time poor. They're tired. They just want to relax when they have a moment. But they deeply care about the well-being of their kids. So if that's the game we're playing, what's the most effective way we can support them? So over COVID, we really just tried to instill that mentality of how is this not happening to us, but for us? And how can we invest in services that otherwise, if we can't run face-to-face programs, how do we develop our digital offerings? And so over COVID, we built 2 new functions of Mancave. One is called Mancave Academy, which is training for educators, parents, youth workers on the art of engaging young men. And so we do face-to-face training as well as an e-course, and we're really to build that out. And that's obviously a really important part in the scalability for us. Train the trainer model. The second thing we've introduced is something called Mancave TV, which is effectively a platform for the boys. And the positioning we're working with, it's like the School of Life meets Vice Media. So it's like wholesome but edgy. And an example of that is because we're competing with, the internet as well. It's like, keep that in mind. And, the algorithm and everything else that a boy can, get his little fingertips around on his phone.
Yeah, and what makes its way in front of his eyes, really, right?
That's it. And so, an example of that is when the whole consent debate, which is still going on, we're like, okay, everyone's telling boys to stop watching porn. And we know that the age they're going to watch porn is probably average age around, like they say, 9 to 11. And so porn's going to be there. So what can we uniquely do if we're that non-authoritative role model in their life? What role can we play in this? We thought, why don't we just interview a porn star? And so we brought a porn star onto the platform and asked them, what was their life like? What consent goes on in porn that we don't see? What was your journey personally through porn? And if you were a teenage boy and you were watching porn, what advice would you give? So that way we're equipping them to make conscious choices as opposed to telling them to do something, which, as we know, as a teenager, when you're told not to do something, what do? You do the thing. So, and we've actually just partnered with Movember to build out Mancave TV. So kind of developed the minimal viable product, worked out how to make content that was engaging for boys. And we're about to take the next step into scaling it with Movember.
Yeah, beautiful. I love this. And, regardless really, if we're talking about, 12 to 16-year-old boys or men or humans in general, right? Telling someone not to do something is not an effective model. And I think, when we look at, as you've said, a couple of really important things around mental health, around, assault, sexual assault, so many of the things that we see as problems that we tend to take that crisis management model, right? Let's put out fires and deal with symptoms, as you said. It's somewhat obvious to anyone with half a brain that the whole don't do drugs thing doesn't really work, right? As one great giant example. And so how can we come in, and, I agree wholeheartedly with this, and get on the education, the prevention side? If we are going, it's very, very easy to say to men, don't rape women, but that's pretty obvious. So why is he doing that? Why is he, heading down that version, that path, let's say, and really starting to educate and speak to them, which I think is beautiful. And I've heard you say this before, instead of speaking about boys and men, let's maybe speak to them.
Yeah, and speak with them.
Yeah.
Underneath that. And I think that when given the space, boys just show up in the most remarkable way. It's very rare for them to feel safe. And that's often due to, the social hierarchy of their teenage years, as well as dealing with the impact of generational trauma, which is, their fathers or their grandfathers coming from that, post-war man, which was stoic, strong, you'll be right, mate. And there are times where, as we know, that's important. You need to get big boy pants on. I was just saying to someone recently, I'm like, kind of pisses me off, like the saying, man up. We're not allowed to do it anymore, because there are absolute times where I just need to man the fuck up and deal with something. And it's kind of not allowed.
Yeah, but I suppose you have the nuance and the intelligence to understand what that means for you, right? And I suppose you, day to day, I'm assuming, are dealing with, the end result of a misconstrued idea of what that is.
That's right.
Yeah. So then if you were to be presented with a room of 12 to 16-year-olds, obviously your wheelhouse, how do you explore a term like that?
Yeah.
Because I know that there is a lot of men listening. I don't know if I have that many, young adolescent males listening, who would have possibly grown up with that and a bunch of things that come off it, right, and around it, and maybe still have some internalized idea around it. And again, all the other terms, we know there's many of them. So how do we, explore the nuance in that and give it relevance?
Yeah, I can tell you for teenage boys, we catch, because they're so tapped, it's almost like they're on autopilot, and they're so tapped into their existing group culture. There's not much conscious thought. It's all about like survival, which often comes through banter, engaging, through just doing everything you can to prevent being rejected or humiliated. And we come up with the most advanced ways to do that, whether it's be the smartest in the room, the quietest in the room, the funniest in the room. And often what we do with boys is It's a real delicate art of creating that space where we often say we don't moralize boys. We don't make them good or bad or right or wrong. We just create a space where they can explore their social conditioning for the first time ever. And so saying like man up, we'd be like, all right, let's write it down. What are all the positive things that could be said around man up? Okay, all the negative things. And we give them post-it notes and I'll put it up on different sides of the whiteboard. And then we'll get to realize that often it can be used as a device to police other people's identity. And what's underneath that? Oh, a fear that actually we're projecting that we also don't want to be kicked out of the group. And so we police others. We've thought like that before. Cool. What did you understand? So you can pull apart these things and just give them the awareness to consciously engage with it. And they'll, chances are probably 10 minutes later, they'll do exactly the same thing. And we'll bring it back and we'll go, hey, what did we learn? Nice. And bring a bit of humor to it. Just
yeah, like it's there's so much in it, right? And one of the things that I'm always getting, because like I work with men who are generally double that age, maybe 30 to 45, but I'm very aware that adolescent dude is often very much alive in there, and a lot of the times still running the show, right? And the safety is so central to engaging the conversation to start with, speaking to and with, right? So there's a bunch of questions I want to go into, but one of the things I'm interested to touch on, you said, look, this has started 2014, it's obviously ramped up, a lot. I suppose one question is there, like, what kind of follow-up do you guys have once you've been somewhere that's maybe more on acute side of it, and then like long term, like, have you seen where the first group of 16-year-olds are now, kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two answers to that. One is we educate the schools saying, hey, we don't want to just come in as a fly in, fly out cycle. That's really important, that. And the journey we've had to take schools on is, yeah, sure, we'll just get you in and we'll see how it goes. And we go, let's just give you the blueprint of what's going to unfold from here. Yeah. And now that we've had we've got with the 20,000 boys we've worked with, 95% of the boys recommend the program to their mates, which is actually quite a wild statistic to think about when it's about talking about their feelings and wanting to recommend it, which shows something, So the follow-up, we have a curriculum, which is a 3-part curriculum that boys can move through. But again, it's taking schools on that journey has been really tough, if I'm really honest about it. They just, because what they're competing with is they can have a keynote speaker come in and speak to their entire school for 40 minutes, give them a moment of inspiration, and their professional development or the personal development budget is gone. What we're doing is culture change, and that takes time. And so now with the schools, we one of the very first kind of rites of passage camps we ran up, it was in just north of Coffs Harbour, and we ran it with 25 boys who are on the edge of the juvenile detention centre system. And we still have boys writing on our Facebook post. This is now literally 6 years later going, that was the best camp I've ever had in my life. When can I come work for you guys? And that's the type of, impact assessment that, you can't measure.
Yes.
But on top of that, we're now working with schools we've worked with for about 4 years, and we're seeing a cultural shift in the school. But the biggest challenge is, they can have this in the school, but then if they go back to, a social media environment that's heavily marketed with, misogyny and traditional masculinity marketing, and we're at this kind of turning point, and we're kind of in the mush in between. And so what's really interesting is a lot of boys still hold more traditional belief systems than guys in the same age bracket than us.
Yeah.
And particularly what we find with these, with the layers that are coming in now that young men are a problem to be solved, that's, literally the news, become protective of their identity. And so they actually engage in the behaviors we're trying to eradicate. And this is the nuance again around living in a society that is very, very politically correct, is we see a lot of boys and a lot of men quite fearful to engage in a very nuanced, complex and emotional gender debate. And by not engaging in it, then they tune out and they go and perpetuate the behaviors that we're trying to eradicate. And, that's just kind of I guess the shadow side of cancel culture. Is, where's the rehabilitation culture? It'd be amazing to see that.
Yeah. And, I think it's true for a lot of people, but, when we look at all the stuff that we're kind of talking about, when you get a boy, and for a lot of men, that's still what's operating, and you make him wrong, many things can happen, but often on a simple level, it's not an effective action that we want, right? As you say, they might, and maybe what that is, there's this generation that you're talking about in the middle, that there's the boys here, and then of course it's the appearance, older than us, they're a reflection of. And, we need something to cling on to, certainly in terms of identity, right? So we'll find it and we'll slink away into nothingness and a real lack of any sense of self, or cling on to anything that gives me a sense of identity, which of course comes back to the safety point, right?
And, I think I'm always fascinated by who rises in public consciousness and when and why. And, the fact that Jordan Peterson's rise, Joe Rogan's rise, Marcus Aubrey's rise, it's like, these are guys who give men a level of confidence and certainty in their identity. And what we see is that a lot of men get a lot of value out of that, but then there's also, like anything, the shadow side, where it becomes about having the skills to just debate because you've got some education or some confidence, opposed to actually sitting there and understanding the delicate nuance of it. And it's hard. How do you have the conversation with men that they're a part of a system that they've also been impacted by? That's the unanswered question I see. We're doing that with boys, so that's tough.
Very much so, because again, when it comes back to potentially, pulling the rug out from someone's entire foundation of life, right, and their identity and what I know, that is unknown. And you do that with anyone and change the context, that's frightening, right? Because survival instinct kicks in. What do? We go into fight or flight. We flee and we fuck off, and we don't enter into the conversation, or we enter into something else, gaming or whatever, right? Good, no good nor bad, simply something that takes us away from something that might be a hell of a lot more effective. Or we fight back, we argue, or we get into the argue, we want to be right or wrong. And, what I see as well in that, and I see it in so many of the men that I work with, and I think, by nature, it is a masculine trait, to see details and reason and logic, but as a result, in a very ineffective way, often we want black or white. And because of course, if my identity is sitting in black and you try and say it needs to be white, that is like taking away my foundation. And so I'm going to argue and I'm going to fight against it. So what's the answer? I mean, that's what we're here for, right? Education, empowerment, and hopefully, you use a really important word, is nuance. And so I suppose that's one of the things that we get to explore. How do we make it safe to explore nuance?
That's, and for me, it starts with self-awareness, and that comes back to what we're doing with the boys. It's instead of waiting until, they get to middle of their life and going, oh, what have I've been running an autopilot here. It's how do we kind of wake them up a little bit earlier? And again, surround them with very diverse role models, showcase a complexity of masculinity.
Yeah.
And I think give them range. And I think that's just, I just keep coming back to that. It's just this ability to find all the expressions of who you are and just not be scared that your dick will fall off if you lean into the more creative ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just foreign, right? What is perhaps foreign to what you've seen or known or had conditioned into you to, this is right and this is what successful will be, right? Because again, this is what I see, at the other or another part of it is that. And there's something that, you've said a couple of times, which is kind of like showcasing the range. And as an extension of that, you're clearly bringing a group of young men together. Roughly how many in a room? Does that vary?
Yeah, so we would work with about 40 to 50 boys and have 3 facilitators in that group.
Cool. Right. So we've got a large group. We've got a few mentors, right? And, I might be leading the witness here, but can you tell me what that would be like if you attempted to do it, certainly as a logistical standpoint from a business, one mentor, one boy, and cover the same amount of impact?
Oh, it's tough. Answer. But I often think about this, like there is such an opportunity to invest in our university students who have got huge amounts of debt and then often go back to study to get a better job and more debt, to mobilize them to come back into the schooling system and have that credit offset their debt, because there is such a gap there. You just go from like, okay, you're 18, you're an adult now, don't mind the fact that your brain is still developing till you're 24, your teenage brain. And then now you're thrust into the world with all this responsibility and no sense of who you are or any taste testers of the world.
Yeah. And you're a man now, so be that effectively. Go and do it well.
Yeah, exactly. And, here's car keys, here's drugs, here's drinking, here's, dating and sex. And then don't talk about it with your mates until you're 10 beers deep, and then feel shame about it the next day.
Yeah, and shut up until the next time.
Yeah. So
it's a beautiful and, I suppose, unfortunately, a radical idea, right? But that also requires something else, right? Because you couldn't have taken 18 or 19-year-old Mike and put him in a very effective place. I was a good dude, and I think that's what a lot of us recognize. I'm good, and you get these banners like, oh, well, just don't be a cunt. There you go. It's like, yeah, that is so empty and useless. So how do we also empower and educate 18, 19, 20-year-olds to be able to play that role, which is so crucial? But the other thing that I'm really hearing in this is that it's so powerful and important to be around peers and to have, mentors and guides. And, this is one of the things that I see as a longer term consequence in a lot of men who are getting perhaps to that middle of life is, and I've kind of mentioned a couple of times, the adolescent in there is still running things a bit. The operating system hasn't changed. They're still running the first iOS. It's like, fucking update that software, brother. And so for a long time, a lot of that conditioning has kind of cemented and anchored and buried down into many things. But one of those things being, I need to have all the answers myself and be able to do it all myself. And the idea of talking about it or reaching out for any kind of help is like monumentally frightening. And what does that say about me, that I can't do it and so on. But, what you guys are doing so beautifully is we can't do that with one man because he actually needs his peers around him. That's so crucial to be part of it, right? A rite of passage isn't one person on an island of isolation. So where I want to kind of go from there for you, Hunter, is because, you're 30 and, you're working across, I imagine, with people older than you in certain contexts as well. So where do you see, in the men today, that adolescent boy who hasn't had this work?
So where do I see the men?
Yeah. Are you seeing that in any particular places? We've spoken about a couple of simple things, statistics around mental health, abuse, and so on. What about more on a day-to-day level? Because, of course, you used the hashtag before, not all men, right? And there is a lot of men that will identify with that. My mental health seems okay, and I don't abuse women, So in the middle of the bell curve, what does that look like?
I think the first thing that's there for me is when we say we're a good man, we need to check that. Because a good man shouldn't be like, the baseline shouldn't be, oh, I've been pretty good. The baseline should be a man that serves his community and has fulfilling relationships and does his own personal work. And it's about creating eldership and creating a better world for his grandkids. That's fuck. If we had men like that en masse, that would be extraordinary. But it's also a privilege to be able to talk like that, and
yeah.
I think that's also this kind of evolution we're popping out of now, is with so many distractions around us, we either numb ourselves or we distract ourselves from, our deep spiritual purpose. And I think there is a waking up. There is a waking up happened. And my hope after COVID is that wasn't just a blip in the radar. Go back to the kind of the short-termism distractions. It's like, no, things are pretty fucked around the world right now. And if you look at the data, it's a lot of men who are making some pretty shocking decisions. And, as we know, hurt people. And so it's just, even when I think of toxic masculinity now, I just sub that word out for generational trauma. And I just go, that is just a hurt boy who's doing this with the tools he has, trying to probably make some parent proud, and is just creating the most extreme mechanisms to do that. And so, I also just believe in inherent goodness in people. And I've seen it. And I've seen it from the rowdiest, biggest rat bag teenage boys who are, just out of juvie, addicted to drugs, stabbed guys before, who when they take the mask off and they share their story, there's just a beautiful child there that's never been seen or never been honored or loved. And for him to have that moment where he shares it with his peer group and they see him for the first time, man, that's just like healing that would change the trajectory of his life. And we, kids like that are likely to go down a similar route to the story they inherited. So, I think just kind of pull it back to your question, it's I guess the thing that I see most is I see a lot of guys, and particularly, from the footy worlds that we came from, as well as like, guys want this, but it's just, where are the railroads to go from one version of masculinity to a more expansive version? And how do I know it's safe? And how do I know it's worth it? And how do I know I'm not going to be rejected or humiliated or bullied because of it? And it just takes, if I can say it, it takes massive balls. Like it really does.
Because we're talking about, on some level, stepping into some unknown, and when there is a lack of certainty and like, in a word, insecurity with self, stepping into something totally new that really challenges your identity and everything that you've learned about who you are and who you need to be takes courage, right? And hopefully that we can educate around having some trust and faith in yourself. But also, I think hopefully something that we're really getting from this is it takes support. It takes an arm reaching across that and going, hold on. And regardless if it feels really unsure on your footing, my arm is strong and I have you.
Yeah.
And then you can, once your feet get firm, I can start to let go and you can, walk for yourself. I say, as I've got like an almost 12-month-old at home, slowly like learning to let go of the table and take a step.
Just on that, my mate Matt talks about, he calls it GMA, Group Masculine Accountability. And there is something really special, which, a lot of guys who participate in men's groups or have a community of guys around them that really support them, that there is something deeply profound around that group masculine accountability.
Absolutely.
Guys can speak their truth to you. They can lovingly challenge you. They can just lay it down and hold you. So I think that's pretty rare and pretty special at the same time.
Absolutely, and it's like it's central to all the work that I do. And anyone listening to this who knows me will be like, oh, Mike's banging on that thing again, but fuck, I'll bang that drum until I die, because there's so much to it. But also, speaking to something that you shared earlier, instantly I recognize the challenge that can come with that. Like, oh, men need space where they need to be together. Like, no fucking way. That's been the system for so long. And when on the other side of, regardless of who it is, there can be perhaps a narrow view of it and what that is. Men getting together and accountability and challenge. What is that? Is that aggression? Like when there's a lot of fear perhaps around that other unknown, maybe.
Sure, and I think fair enough. There's fear there. There's a heap of evidence that when certain men get together, that some pretty shit decisions get made. Like, so much evidence there. And there's also evidence for incredible healing and support and wanting to have better relationships. And, I think that's the important thing, that if those who are in the men's work movement need to continually check ourselves on. You know, what is the unconscious bias? What is this subtle entitlement? What is the privilege that's invisible? You know, how do we continue to do our own work whilst also be conscious of that? And also my personal point of view on this is we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can have our masculine traits. And it's just around kind of reprogramming them to what's applicable in 2021. And that's something which I see is, you know, sometimes, you know, probably the older men that we work with have been really impacted by like pretty old school masculine behaviors, and they get scared of the masculine. And so they adopt a more feminine identity. And part of the big healing we've got to go is, mate, you can have it all. You know?
Yeah, heart and backbone, right? And we just then get to explore, like the term man up, perhaps, what that means, right? What is the scope in those? And it's not necessarily this one narrow track. But either way, you know, one over the other tends to maybe lead somewhere ineffective. There was something in there that you spoke about in terms of, you know, maybe these guys who are like very hard exteriors, you know, and for many reasons, again, safety is a big theme here, right? They've done some pretty serious shit, come out of juvenile system, perhaps. And once the mask comes off, there's this big heart there. You know, that, by the way, would be my experience of like every dude that has ever allowed himself to, you know, step into something where there's a real conversation, you know, and I do hear it as a, I have to giggle sometimes internally, sometimes mistakenly externally, when there's a statement like, I'm actually really sensitive, or, you know, like I'm actually really deep, you know, it's like, hey brother, fuck, we all are. That's the whole point. You know, you can have that duality, right? But when one is a inflated version to protect the other, that's when we run into problems, right?
Nice. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and my experience is those who have experienced the most trauma often have the most love to give, you know, because they've got the depth, and it's about healing the different parts of themselves that have been traumatized and unconditionally loving all those parts. And from that place, there's a clean window, you know, and they can give more, and people feel that. There's a depth and a gravity in people like that.
Yeah, it's about accessing it, and again, you know, making it safe for him to step into something that has been, you know, his armor for so long, which, you know, I think is often a very apt term in conjunction with the idea of a mask, right? Is that this is to protect me. So one of the things I want to look back to then is, you know, we're talking about adolescent boys here a lot, and okay, some of us still have that running around in us, and oh, hello, your introduction, you know, spoke to this as well. So, you know, for you, what do you see as the bridge here for your own journey and, you know, the 16, 15, 12, you know, the adolescent hunter?
Yeah, my journey at this stage with this is, it's been, it's so late as always, but I went through a phase when I started Mancave, I had that real abrupt moment going, oh shit, am I just doing this for my own therapy? And I really sat in that. And that was probably a good 6 months of like a thorough investigation, and did a lot of work to heal the challenges that I had growing up with, whether it was family dynamics, personal decisions I made, and just cleaning up a lot of my integrity, to be honest. And had a choice going, okay, now this is, you know, I've kind of stopped that. Like I've almost put like there's a line in the sand. Do I want to choose this now? And that's the journey I went on. And now I'm just getting the latest layer of it, which is, you know, if for me in my value system, it comes down to service. And, you know, I'm personally coming to a point where I'm like, wow, I've run a charity for 6 or 7 years. And I've got, you know, mates who are buying houses, and, you know, I'm still rocking this old school Corolla, and, you know, which I laugh at, and like part of me doesn't give a shit about. And then like, hey, oof, maybe it's time to change gears, you know, and just sitting with and not shaming or shunning those parts, but just welcoming them in.
Yeah.
And really the point I'm up to now in the journey is just trusting and sitting in the uncertainty and accessing what I call my deeper king energy. And from that place, knowing that, yeah, it's just that piece of faith. And I don't have a blueprint. I've got an energetic pull to who I want to be and what I want to create in my life, but I don't feel the need to build the blueprint from a place of insecurity or certainty and wrap my life plan around it. It's a bit of a deeper path that I'm sitting in at the moment.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that. So yeah, and what I'm hearing in that is, yeah, maybe as an adolescent or someone who might have that part of him still, running a bit of the operating system, there can be an idea of what life is going to be or what it needs to be. And, maybe at some point we can stop and check and get curious, because, what I'm hearing and a lot of what you're sharing there as well is, this curiosity, not judging something, not putting meaning on something, making it bad or anything, but simply getting curious about it. And then going, is this what I want? Is this who I want to be? And the ideas around this, where did they come from? Right. And so therefore, and something that I love that you said there was essentially, am I choosing this? So, beyond that, what am I choosing? What do I want to choose for my life? And can I be okay with the fact that whilst I can control a lot in my day-to-day in regards to myself and my actions, what comes, I cannot. And so can I be at peace with that?
That's that's it, isn't it? No matter what happens, how do I choose to show up?
Yeah.
And that's, man's search for meaning, I think, knocked that out of the park, right?
Absolutely. So, mate, I want to change gears a little bit. Like as an organization and personally, you've done obviously some phenomenal work, and you've been in some very interesting places. And I know one thing that you've been involved in, I suppose, on some level in the last few years, is that you've done some work with Prince Harry and Meghan, which is not something that I tend to sit here and say about that many of my guests. So I want to ask you a little bit on that, because it would be very easy to look at that and go, whoa, maybe that's really cool, or maybe that's really powerful. And I imagine it might have been quite a cool thing to do, and go to Buckingham Palace and sit there, and have a conversation of some sorts with the Queen. But for you, what does it actually mean in terms of like what you can do? There's these two figureheads literally and very powerful people. But at what you're doing, which is a very grassroots level, what do you see a relationship like that, actually kind of being able to do and provide and lead to?
Yeah.
And any cool stories, of course.
It was, it was an extraordinary opportunity. So it was in 2018. I was named a Queen's Young Leader by Her Majesty the Queen, and we did a year-long course with Cambridge on social change, and then flew over to London to have 2 weeks over there, 1 week at Cambridge, and then the next week meeting just some incredible people of British royalty. Everyone from Jamie Oliver to some lords of something, and probably should remember that, all the way to Sir John Major, the former Prime Minister, to then the actual ceremony, which was in Buckingham Palace. And it's quite an extraordinary moment sitting on the bus as the Buckingham Palace gates opened and just moving in there. And I remember they were giving us this briefing as we walked up these stairs. It was these red steps that then went into this really beautiful pink carpet. And as we're walking up the steps, it felt like walking to heaven. It was just these huge skylights, chandeliers, huge paintings. And I think I was just giggling and swearing, going, what the hell has happened to my life? And then I remember for the actual awards ceremony, it was live streamed through the royal family's Facebook page. So that was just extraordinary. And in the audience, there was former Olympians, Prime Minister, the Queen, Harry, Meghan, Sir David Beckham. And I remember it was actually awesome. We had this black gospel choir there too, which was an extraordinary contradiction to what we know around, traditionally the royal family. I remember as I walked up to get the award, absolutely shitting myself. And I was like, I should do the right thing here. I should look at obviously the Queen, but as I come up to her, but I'll look at, Harry, I'll look at Meghan Markle, I'll look at, Sir John Major. And I just went bang, straight to Bex. And he just winked at me, and I just twitched, and I was like, "Oh God!" Oh God. And I walked up and got the award. And then what I didn't know they would do was they showed a video of the man cave in Buckingham Palace.
All right.
It's quite an extraordinary moment, and the Australian accent has never sounded more bogan than in but it really kind of stood out.
Yeah.
And it was a 2.5 minute video hearing the impact of boys, the programs had on boys. And then as we walked out, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Harry and Meghan would like to have a private meeting with you." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "It's in like the gold room." And I was like, "Oh my God, that is amazingly named room."
Yeah.
And they came in, and first of all, like everyone moves. Like they have people before them that go and set up the room. So when they walk in, everything's perfect, from the guests to the cleanliness to security. And so when they come in, all eyes are on them. And it's quite extraordinary to be in the presence where there is such gravity around two human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, Meghan Markle came up and said, she's a big believer in gender equality and did a lot of activism there before she became famous, and really gets the importance of boys and men's role in gender equality.
Mm-hmm.
Harry came over and said from his own personal journey with mental health, the importance that having a program like Mancave would have on him.
Mm.
And I think the thing that people don't get around his journey is that, at the age of 7 or 8, his mother died from really tragic circumstances. He then went on his own mental health journey that he had to deal with in private, in a very traditional system.
Yeah, like proper private.
Proper private. And headlines about his mother all across the media surrounded for his entire life.
Yeah.
Then has his rebellious, wild teenage years, which I have certainly had. Mike, I know you had too.
Yeah. And I think we probably all have on some scale, right?
That releasing, shedding, finding identity, pushing boundaries, pushing mortality, risk-taking activities. Then he joins the army and goes over to Afghanistan. He's on the front line doing that. Then he comes back and takes up a position as the chair of the Commonwealth Youth Foundation. Now, the Commonwealth is 53 countries, 2 billion people, but largely developing countries. So he's on the front line meeting some of the most vulnerable people in the world. Have such an effect on your character development. It have such an effect, particularly when you come from the ivory tower. And then when you come back and then you engage in a relationship with someone and you have a choice, do you follow your own personal moral compass, your family, your wife, your child, or a system that you've inherited? And sure, there's some decisions that he's made that are up to him to make around how they about what they did. But for me, there's just no greater example of a public figure who is choosing values-based leadership than him right now. If you look at the data, what he's done, and then his new documentary around mental health, it's like they're using the power of influence on Spotify, on Netflix, to positively impact social change. He's just become the chief impact officer at Silicon Valley mental health tech company.
Right.
That is, the model of someone choosing their values. So,
yeah, and despite what else might be said about it, which is obviously many and varied, right? And it's like it'll be said anyway, but I got to do what my compass tells me to do.
That's exactly right. And, through that relationship we've now had about 3 separate meetings with them. And everything from I've walked out of a meeting and my phone has just been exploding, and I start to panic as something's happened on a program. Then all these news articles are popping up, and I've realized that on their Instagram account they unfollowed everyone except for 10 accounts across the world, and Mancave was one of them, alongside Oprah. It was so funny. But I just think it's amazing the credibility that's given us and the doors that's opened, because whether people believe in the monarch or not, it does bring a level of clout that allows us to leverage that and to access more dollars and more impact for our programs.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? If someone is in the position where they can influence, then you have a choice. How do I do it? Essentially, right? Beautiful. Yeah. What an experience. I can only imagine. And I do remember, witnessing at the time some of the footage and all that kind of stuff. And I part of me there was thinking, like, when you were talking about who you were eyeballing, like, was there going to be I've looked away from where I'm walking, and so I'm going to trip up or something, right?
Royal family's live stream of their Facebook. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, mate. So, okay, I'm looking at the time and need to wrap this thing up. So where I want to go next, and you look, mate, take this wherever you want. And I don't tend to ask these questions, but it feels relevant on some level, is, because on some level we're talking to young men, we are talking to their parents, and we're talking to us, and who both are going somewhere and have been somewhere and have that dude in us as well. There might be something that you have a quote, something that lands for you, but like, what is the message you think at the moment that men need to be hearing, contemplating, reflecting on, marinating on, and potentially taking action on?
Man, the words that are there for me are just do your work. And whatever that means to you, if it's reflection, if it's get a coach, if it's journal, if it's spend time in nature, if it's actually share with your best mate how you actually feel about it. I think that's where it starts. And we can't wait for government or companies to fix the status of the world right now. And I think there's no bigger call to action than thinking about the future for our grandkids right now. And I think that starts with us elevating our own consciousness. And that's not a word wasn't in my vocab growing up, but it really comes down to that, because when we're more conscious, we're more in touch with who we are, and we can help others more.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. And what also hit me when you said it was like, because I know it could be potentially easy for a lot of guys to go, cool, what is that? But I would also offer that maybe on some level what it is, not necessarily all the details, but like something, like you said, it's maybe having the conversation with your mate. Yeah, beautiful, Hunter. Thank you for that. Okay, so before we wrap, I know there's some other things you do besides Mancave, so wherever you want to hit with it, other projects that you have on that people can get involved in, and where can we find you? And any links and all that stuff, I'll make sure we have.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, I think just the final thing, we often get asked, like, how can I help Mancave? And just what we do, we train our facilitators like a professional sports team. So it's not just guys coming in with a story. So the best way that people can actually help us is to support a new brand that we've just launched. It's called Stuff, and it's a personal care brand for men. The tagline is championing healthy masculinity. And basically what we want Stuff to do is to support men as they navigate a new era of masculinity. And so it's natural deodorants, body wash, shampoo, face wash, soon to be moisturizer, shave gel, and refills. The idea is that, the execution is that Mancave is set up as a large shareholder in Stuff. So it has equity in the business, and sales from Stuff fund boys to go through the Mancave. So if there are guys out there who want to support what we're doing, the most effective way they can do that is to support and purchase Stuff products, because we know it just helps a boy become a better man. And it's, evolving out. It's like, we want it to be like the modern Lynx, with a social purpose and no misogyny.
Yeah, and doesn't smell like Lynx.
Exactly.
Beautiful. I love it. Hunter, thank you. And again, we'll make sure we've got all of that stuff. So wherever you listen to this, if you head over to wherever the links show you, you'll be able to find that stuff. Hunter Johnson, thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely love, what you're doing in the world, and also, who you're being in the world. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you for coming on.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark. Love your work too, man.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.